Imagine waking up in the dead of night. Outside, a blizzard is raging at 30 degrees below zero. The wind is whipping against the tent walls so loudly that you can barely hear your own breathing. You are lying in your warm sleeping bag. You are safe. But then, something happens. Something so terrifying that the freezing cold outside suddenly seems like the lesser of two evils. You reach for your knife, but not to defend yourself. You use it to slash the tent open from the inside. You run out, into the deadly darkness, no shoes, no jacket. You know you will freeze to death, but you also know if you stay in that tent, a fate awaits you that is far worse than death. What drove 9 experienced mountaineers in 1959 to flee into certain doom? Why did their bodies show injuries that looked like a high-speed car crash, yet had no external wounds? And why? Was one woman missing her eyes and her tongue? Welcome to the Dyatlov Pass. Welcome to a place where logic ends and horror begins. To understand the horror, we must first meet the victims. They were not beginners. The group consisted of 10 students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were young, fit, and extremely experienced in the wild. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student known for his iron discipline and calm nature. His word was law. The goal of the expedition was Mount Oderton in the northern Ural Mountains. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, this name literally translates to, "Don't go there," a warning they chose to ignore. We found their diaries. They tell the story of a happy journey. We read about jokes by the campfire, the beauty of the snowy landscape, small flirtations, and a love for nature. In the photos, we see smiling faces. Nothing, absolutely nothing pointed towards a catastrophe. One of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, had to leave the group early due to illness. He was disappointed, Guiteau. He didn't know that his joint pain would save his life. He was the only one who returned. On February 1st, 1959, the group set up camp on the slopes of Kholat Shakal, another Mansi name. It translates to the Mountain of the Dead. Why Dyatlov decided to camp on the open, wind-swept slope instead of the protective forest just 1 mile down is the first mystery. Did he want to avoid losing altitude? Or did they want to watch something from up there? Or were they being watched? The last photo on their camera shows them setting up the tent in the twilight. After that, the records fall silent. Forever. When the group failed to send their scheduled telegram, families began to ask questions. It took weeks for the search parties to find the camp, and what they saw made their blood run cold. The tent was half buried in snow, but visible. No one was there. But the side of the tent had been slashed open. Criminal investigators later confirmed. The cuts were made from the inside. Outside in the snow, they found footprints, 8 or 9 pairs. Some were wearing only one sock, others were barefoot. The tracks were strange. It was not a frantic escape. The footprints showed a normal walking pace. They walked side by side down the slope, into the darkness, into the forest. Why don't you run when you are in a panic? And why do you walk so calmly when you are walking towards your death? At the edge of the forest, under a massive cedar tree, the search teams made the first gruesome discovery. 2 of the men. They lay next to the remains of a small fire. They were wearing only their underwear. Their hands were burned, charred. As if, in their desperation, they had tried to grab the fire with their bare hands to warm themselves, unable to feel the pain. The branches of the cedar tree were broken up to a height of 5 meters. Scraps of skin and blood were stuck to the bark. One of them had climbed the tree. again and again. Did he want to see if the tent was still there? Or did he want to see if it was still there? If the thing that drove them out of the tent had followed them? 100 yards away, they found 3 more bodies, including the leader, Igor Dyatlov. They lay in a line between the cedar and the tent. Their body language suggested they had been trying to crawl back to the camp. They died in the snow, their frozen eyes fixed on their abandoned tent. But this was only the beginning. The true mystery lay deeper in the woods. 4 hikers were still missing. It took 2 months for the snow to melt before they were found. They lay in a ravine, 75 yards deeper into the forest, buried under 4 meters of snow. And here is where every rational explanation collapses. Unlike the others who had simply frozen to death, these 4 bodies were brutally broken. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a crushed skull. Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina had completely crushed chests. Their ribs were driven into their lungs and hearts. The forensic pathologist compared the force required to cause such damage to that of a heavy car crash or a shock wave. No human, no animal could inflict such injuries. But the most terrifying part was, there were no bruises, no cuts on the skin. The bodies were externally almost untouched. They were crushed from the inside. And then, the pathologist looked into the face of Lyudmila Dubinina. Where her eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets. And her mouth stood open. Her tongue was missing. It hadn't been bitten off or cut out. The root muscle was intact. It was just gone. According to some reports, their skin had turned a strange color, orange to brown. Their hair had turned gray. Within a single night, the Soviet authorities closed the case in a hurry. The official cause of death? A compelling natural force that the hikers were unable to overcome. The files were stamped secret and locked away. What was this force? Was it an avalanche? That is the most accepted theory today. A small slab avalanche that buried the tent. That would explain why they cut the tent open. But does a small avalanche explain crushed skulls without external wounds? Does it explain why experienced hikers walk barefoot into death instead of digging out their boots? And above all, an avalanche does not explain the radiation, because when the hiker's clothing was tested, the Geiger counter ticked. Beta radiation. Not lethally high, but significantly higher than the natural background levels. Where does radioactivity come from in the deepest Ural Mountains? Other hiking groups, who were about 30 miles away that night, reported strange lights in the sky, glowing orange spheres floating silently over the mountain of the dead. Was it a secret military rocket test? A weapon that kills via pressure waves without leaving traces? That would explain the internal injuries, the radiation, the discolored skin, and the secrecy by the KGB. Or was it infrasound? A physical phenomenon where the wind blowing through the mountains creates a specific frequency. This frequency is inaudible to the human ear, but it induces panic in the brain. It creates terror, shortness of breath, and hallucinations. Were they running from a monster that only existed in their minds? There are dozens of theories, from the Yeti to escaped convicts to aliens. But no single theory can explain every detail. There is always one puzzle piece that doesn't fit. The 9 hikers of the Dyatlov Pass lie today in a cemetery in Yekaterinburg. Their faces on the tombstones still look at us, smiling, unknowing. The mountain of the dead has kept its secret. If you were to camp there today, alone in the darkness while the wind beats against your tent walls, would you feel safe? Or would you, deep in the night, hear footsteps in the snow? Sleep well, if you can.